But beginning with, what was it like, to be a student back in the day? And I prepared some pictures because it is kind of it's kind of fun to kind of see. And I'll pull that up, see if that'll let me. Um, and so when we look at the original schoolhouse, which we still have in Kirksville, you're certainly welcome. Some of you, if you're a graduate of KCOM, you could not miss this. It sits prominently on campus. It's always existed. Even though for a time it was a barber shop, it was student housing, but it's great to see Dr. Still at that first school. And as he said, little ideas grow into big things. So don't mind the day of little things. It's kind of a biblical passage because, it's the start. It's the first step of a journey. And so they kept that school as a reminder. And now with 58 schools in the United States and hundreds worldwide, it's amazing what one person could do for healthcare.
Hey, Jason, I had a question about that school, and that was, where was that school originally? I mean, I know where it is now. Was it always there, or didn't we move it to the current location, or where was that school? Where did it sit originally in Kirksville?
And that's interesting because it was moved multiple times because it kept getting in the way of progress. So, of course, Dr. Still builds this tiny little school for the purposes of osteopathy. And within 2 to 3 years, he needs a bigger brick institution, which is still on the campus, but about 3 blocks probably to the west from the museum and from that entrance to the campus. And after a while, they moved it across the street to get it out of the way. Well, then they built a hospital. So then they moved it over to Dr. Still's mansion to get it out of the way. But then they turned it into a nursing home. So they moved it back to the campus, and it sat, near what was the Oklahoma building, a clinic. That was the first museum. And finally, they enclosed it into an atrium where is protected today in a glass, massive kind of in containment. And we hope that's the last home for the school. And I'm waiting for Dr. Brown to give me some other rebuttal.
Oh, sorry, and I didn't realize you were waiting for a rebuttal on that. I found that was interesting. Our original school was more like a mobile home.
It really was. And when Dr. Still built that brick first building in 1895, quickly it was too small. I mean, so many people wanted to be part of this healthcare profession where we focused on bringing people to health, and people got better. We weren't dosing them with mercury and arsenic and then sending them off on, morphine or opium. That people got better with what we were doing. And so Dr. Still said, well, we need to enlarge the school. Well, of course, this was such a rapid growth. The kids were like, Dad, I mean, come on. And he builds a back wing. And they're like, what's going on? And he says, you know what? Still too small. He builds a front wing. So he creates a sandwich out of the new brick building. And as he said, they thought I was nuts. But we quickly filled that building and a lot more. So, I mean, we have always, and Dr. Still said this, osteopathy is progressive. It grows. And what we're experiencing today is part of that adaptation and growth. Even in view of this disease, COVID-19, we are still not stopping. We're still educating. Students are still coming. And more than ever, things that we know about anatomy and research are helping COVID victims.
So when you started that's part of a new profession.
It truly was.
Never, been practiced before students.
And this was what was unique. It was a focus on health. And before, we were always doing something to the body instead of preparing the body to fight the forces that are outside coming within, including the drugs that we're basically being repaired from. So when we look at this first class of students, and we have in this picture 5 women. Now the women are a little bit rough and frontier-like, so if you can't find them, that's a problem often people have. But I promise you, there are 5 women in this picture, and there are actually 6 students. One gal just didn't make it for the picture, but that was unique too. letting women, and this is part of inclusiveness. Dr. Still, his mother was an amazing woman with dad out working, practicing away from home. She ran things. And he said, my mom is quite capable. Women are quite capable. And he accepted women into the class. Now, women were a little bit scared because it's like, well, does this make me like a guy because I'm a doctor? And yet Dr. Still's daughter in the very top, that attractive 16-year-old girl, said, no, you don't use your femininity. You're still a woman, and you can do medicine. You can do it all. And so, again, I think it's exciting to look at this picture. Dr. Still in the center, the skeleton Columbus, and then William Smith on the other side of the skeleton. He was a European anatomist and first professor and first graduate of the school.
What about the dog?
I knew you'd ask about the dog. Isn't that a freak? That looks like an alien. If you look in the middle of the lower picture.
Not the most attractive picture of a dog, I'll admit.
Well, if you were a stuffed animal, or I guess I should say, this is a little bit more like taxidermy.
I'm gonna say it looks like he's wearing a collar.
Well, that collar is a flap of skin, so you can move the head. So people, and I didn't know about this dog too. It looked like it came off a spaceship or something. Or demon dog, we might call it. But here's the thing. The dog actually is this Parcel photographer. It's a prop. And so when you have a family, it's like, well, do something. It's like, well, throw a dog in there. So this dog appears in multiple pictures of family portraits. And of course, the head's just kind of turned another way, but it's still the same creepy dog. And so we know that that is a dead animal just thrown in there for laughs.
It's good to know that they had a sense of humor, even the first class there.
And the skeleton is interesting because we had such a hard time getting cadavers that the few cadavers they had would literally pick them to the bone. And in this case, because of the explorer, Columbus, and osteopathy was a new exploration, he was called Columbus.
Very cool. Very, very cool. So speaking of anatomy lab, where did they get cadavers this time? I mean, we know that they're made by donations now, and people graciously are donating their bodies to science and our education. But we hear, rumors and stories of how cadavers may have been obtained in the past. Where did they typically find these for educational opportunities?
Well, and that's the challenge because being a new school, we didn't have the clout to get the cadavers that normally came from prisons or from what was called the poorhouses. And that was actually a way of threatening you, was that if you do no good, you're going to end up on the table and picked through by student doctors. And we had to actually acquire cadavers all the way from Chicago. Well, William Smith in that picture, while he was acquiring a cadaver in Chicago, he was at an insane asylum, and he assumed it was rather large. There were a lot of deaths, and as he was going through, the guy kind of said, well, let me give you a tour of the inmates. And he says, that guy has 6 fingers. That one kind of has they had all kinds of genetic issues sometimes, those that were in these asylums. And he asked him, he goes, well, Dr. Smith, if you see anything you want, let me know. And Smith was like, excuse me? We're here to get cadavers. These are living people. Oh, yeah, but most of them die rather soon anyway. And what Smith discovered was they were actually killing off the people that were in the asylum, and got into this big mess because one of the women in the asylum was from a prominent family, and when her corpse came up missing and they figured out what happened, everything went to court and they shut down the system. We came back to Missouri. They were threatening to pull our faculty and throw them in jail forever. Our governor, Lon Stevens, his wife Maggie, they were young, they were progressive, they used osteopathy, and he said, I can't believe we got into this mess. From now on, Crooksville, the Osteopathic School, will have as many cadavers as any other medical school, and we never ever had another issue. So from this first picture, which was on this probably stripped apart cadaver up in the attic of the original brick building, we can see that the students, the men and women, with adequate number of cadavers, and good old Dr. Still himself, teaching about anatomy.
What was the curriculum like? I know this is kind of slightly off subject, but for me, anatomy was part of the first few years of medical school, and we would do a couple years of academics, book studying for exams, with some integrated things along the way, and then we would really focus hard on clinical years. What was the curriculum like for beginning students, back then? Or do we, I'm sure we have some of that data somewhere.
You're right. And it was very heavy in obviously anatomy, because Dr. Still's attitude is, if you don't know what's normal, how do you know what's abnormal? But he also cautioned the student, remember, the body in death is different. And so, though we're using these, it's not really the real body. So keep that in mind. And we learn things like cranium. They always thought the skull was just like a rock. And yet there actually is, as we all know, a lot of movement, and there's a whole respiratory system of fluids and things going on. But because nobody really thought about it in the living, we only looked at the skull of the dead, where basically it's like epoxy, the adhesives just lock. And literally, if you try to break it down the suture, the bone will break rather than, the cartilage that adheres. And because we've tried to break open skulls, they don't break along the sutures, it breaks elsewhere because it's that tough. So Dr. Still warned us, anatomy is an important part of your lesson. But they had histology, pathology, systemology, all the other courses, pretty much, even public health, for STDs, sexual transmitted diseases and such, and sanitation. They use radiology, minor surgery. So it is interesting how much similar to the curriculum of someone today that they had. We just have more medicines and more things, more pharmacology and treatment techniques. And in cadavers, we still use cadavers donated, as you mentioned, but then we also use a digital cut up cadaver, and they use basically scanning ultrasound of their own body. So they see it living. So our students get anatomy from 3 different sources. And I think we find it makes them better doctors, and that's why they're so wanted often by the military and other institutions. Our graduates are sought after because of their skills and their knowledge of being able to do ultrasound themselves.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I do remember them specifically when we started anatomy lab being told these cadavers aren't going to be exactly the same as the human body.
And they do
keep modeling was just coming into vogue when I started my anatomy lab. These 3D modelings are just amazing now, the digital ones, and they say it's a lot more accurate than the I like this one slide here, Jason.
So, and that's the thing, is they can now actually take 3D imaging with goggles, and actually you can slice through with your hands. And as you say, you get a more realistic approach to cadavers. So it is fascinating how things have kind of changed. So we've got another image, housing. Kirksville was a very small town. And so when students came, there was not apartments or hotels or things that you could even use. So people just took in students and made a good living off of it. And you can see to the right, furnished rooms. Almost every student in the early 1900s lived in someone's house, and they have pictures of their room in the house. And the family benefited from having a doctor, at least a practicing student doctor, but it was better than nothing, right there to treat you.
Jason, can you hear me okay now? I was
Now I
trying
can
to
hear
switch.
you. You
Perfect.
were stuttering a little bit earlier.
Yeah, sorry. I don't know what's going on with the connection over here tonight. It's usually, this is my most reliable one. So, you know, talking about the students, where did they typically live? You know, did they, live in the boarding houses? Were they, staying with family members when they first came to school? What was the typical arrangement like?
Well, we had up to 600 students, 200 per class, 3 classes graduating winter, summer, and fall. So with 600 students um, per year, and you'd have up to 3 years of students, they had students everywhere, and you just found a place, and that's where you lived. And it really was that way. It sounds like, even up through the 1960s, trying to find a place. Um, so again, you can see in this case, this family, and they had massive homes, took in 5 or 6 different students, and they'd live together in a room, and it was quite profitable for the town. What was your living conditions like, Dr. Brown?
We actually had a nice little apartment. So one of the reasons we picked Kirksville was because it was so cheap to live there. I don't know, maybe it was, only a few dollars more than what it was back then. Who knows? It was considerably cheaper to live in Kirksville than anywhere else, but we loved it.
And we do find that today, though there is 58 different schools, one of the factors that people like Kirksville is because it's quiet, it's safe, you can focus on your studies, and the cost of living, housing, gas, food, because we're in a farming community, it is cheaper than almost anywhere in the United States. So you're already got enough student debt if you can lower that sum. We were always told that every dollar you spend, you're going to pay back 4. So with that in mind, it makes you very cautious as a student, and Kirksville is a good answer.
Absolutely. So let me ask you this. If I were signing up for AT Still School, what kind of time commitment would that be back then? How many months or years?
Well, and that's a good question. Initially, it was 2 years, 10 months per year. So 20 months of training, which doesn't sound like a lot. And then that extended by about 1907 or 8 to 3 years. And by the Flexner Report, where they revamped all of medical education in 1910, it had moved to 4 years, which again is what is standard today, is 4 years. I don't know how they do it all in 4 years, to be honest. How do you do it in 4 years?
I don't know. They all blurred into one big long year for me. So there's it was what it was. So, but it wasn't all work. I mean, there were fun and games, and as you can show from this slide, there were fun and games going on here. Why don't you tell us what's going on in this picture here?
Well, I'm guessing obviously it's fall. We've got a pumpkin in the front, and we've got a skeleton at the top. We've got a football poster behind in the background. So I'm pretty sure, of course, this probably is around October, a good season. And, socializing, students were very active with still charity groups, the YMCA, and working in those areas, as well as academic fraternities and sororities. And there were the Theta Psi's, they still existed, what we called the kind of more social fraternities and sororities. And so, again, students often wrote it was hard to get your medical work done because there were so many distractions going on. Today's
And it's that Columbus in the back top corner there.
Well, I think we call every skeleton Columbus. But the funny thing is, today I do find our students are a lot more focused on the classes. But, again, and our students came from really prestigious colleges. I mean, many of our early students came from Harvard and Yale and these wonderful East Coast schools. And they'd arrive in Kirksville and be like, where the heck am I? I came from Texas, and I remember in 1980, it's like, ooh, I just went back in time 20 years. I mean, fashion and blue laws and racial. I mean, it's like, where am I? I couldn't figure it out in 1980. That time had passed Kirksville, it seemed. I think we've caught up, but that small town attitude is actually kind of nice. But students would arrive, and it would just be so different from what they were experiencing. And then they get involved in all these activities. And we'll show you again. This is what the lecture hall was at. remember I told you Dr. Still created an extra wing, kind of like a sandwich. We're looking from one wing of one end through the middle out into the back of another wing. So this would be the whole college across, and they could actually close the doors and create two classrooms or one larger room. And this was called Memorial Hall in memory of Dr. Still's son, who died on graduation day of the first class. And so it was memorizing Frank, I'm sorry, Fred, who was Dr. Still's youngest son, and the most like him.
Now, they didn't have audio-visual, technology back then. Would it just be the guy at the front would just yell really loud, or how would they get so the people in the back of the room could even hear what's going on in those scenarios?
Well, it certainly was theatrical. It's like people would say when Dr. Still was actually, he just wander in if he wanted to talk. He didn't have a schedule. If you were lucky and that was the day he felt like talking, he showed up. But they said his voice was really raspy and hoarse, but penetrating, that even the kid in the furthest seat could hear Dr. Still when he spoke. And so there actually somewhere is floating around a recording of Dr. Still's voice. He and Thomas Edison were big buddies. And we know that Thomas Edison recorded Dr. Still on what would be a cylinder seal. So if any of you out there have ever heard of it, but a cylinder would play like a record player, but it was round. And this cylinder, Dr. Still died in 1917. They had the last AOA convention in Kirksville in 1928 because Dr. Still was born in 1828, the 100-year anniversary of Dr. Still's birth. One more, and it was the last AOA because they'd have 8,000 people, and there were only 8,000 residents. So everybody had to take in an osteopath during the convention. And AOA said, this is the last time. But they played this cylinder. And people said, oh my gosh, it's been 11 years since we heard the old doctor. How great. And it was an article written about it. That's the Holy Grail. I'm looking for the cylinder of Dr. Still's voice.
Interesting. That would be something wonderful to catch in a digital format.
And so we see now we don't have the surgical pits. Imagine with COVID and mask and social distancing, people breathing and coughing on you while you're laid open down in the pit or having a baby. In this case, it's just manipulation, so not so horrible. But literally, it would circle and it would go up like 8 tiers. So you could put the entire class watching a demonstration in the pit. And there were surgeries. We have actual film clips of women with cancer having mastectomies, giving birth, real film clips, and everybody just breathing and looking in.
Now, where was this located? Was this inside the hospital, inside the school?
It was actually, if you think of kind of where the main brick building with the two wings was, it basically was kind of down in the basement area, and finally was just filled in, basically. But amazing to see this kind of, with our rules of HIPAA and things like that, and that people could just sit there and watch you.
To me, this would be like the earlier forms of YouTube, being able to watch a procedure being performed as part of your education.
And I might add, Dr. Still was open to the community getting the opportunity to understand. And so locals would actually kind of wander in and on occasion get to see such. Definitely dissection. Students did it outside. There'd be 6 or 7 on a cadaver. And of course, the local folk would get a little too close. We have stories from great grandchildren of some of these people that were around the time of Dr. Still. And they said they heard stories of family members coming back home and finding an ear or a finger tucked in their purse or pocket, that the students thought it was great humor that while they were talking to them, to slip a piece of the body. Now, of course, we would never do that kind of disgracefulness to a body. But back then, because these were considered, kind of not the best people of society, they would, and I think it was a way of dealing with death, is to kind of joke about it, didn't make it so horrific for people. And it's just a way of working through this kind of a situation that you're put in. We have students that show up in first day of dissection, not recently, but they just can't do it. They realize this is not for me. I don't know what they go into, but certainly not medicine.
Now, would these surgery classes be part of, a first year curriculum, or are these going to be your more advanced students that are kind of doing this? When would you start going into the surgical pit and learning about surgeries?
And certainly there was the opportunity always to come in and watch, but these would be your advanced courses. And of course, there was a lot of surgery, appendectomies and basically tonsils. I mean, all kinds of minor surgeries. Students actually were required to perform a tonsillectomy on each other. You wanted a partner
Wow.
that you could trust. And it was not unheard of that a blotched tonsillectomy basically would bleed, and a few students in the 20s died. And, all for lack of a couple stitches that might have stopped that blood flow.
That brings a whole new meaning to signing up for medical school.
Life and death.
Quite amazing. Anything else we can learn from the surgical pit there?
I think that pretty much covers it. Again, we do, if you ever want, give us a call. We can send you some of the video, and you can actually watch what was going on in the treatments. And if we move to another slide, I mean, if you've been to Kirksville, you'd recognize the courthouse. It hasn't changed, nor has the buildings around it. Doctor still came to Kirksville, he would know exactly where he's at. His son's bank, which actually, because there was a lot of money, is now the pizza joint, but it still says Citizens Bank. And we actually have dollar bills. You can make your own money, and they look like plain old $1 US dollar bills. Harry still signed because he was the president of the bank and he ran the finances, and they built new schools and they financed student loans. And so it was a big deal. And so if Dr. Still were to come today, he wouldn't understand why his son's bank was a pizza parlor, but he certainly recognized the building. And so big parades would happen around the courthouse. They'd come from campus, and celebrations you can see with the tent. There'd be singing and acting and costumes. And so it really was a big deal. This was typically hospital day. We still have hospital day on campus where, students come and they get to interview and look at potential work sites. Do you remember hospital day?
I do remember that, but it was definitely not a party like this.
So again, and sororities, again, these things are not as big today. Everything's almost academic, folks. But the axis, with noted for the bones in the neck area, we had the atlas for the men and axis for the women as the clubs, and they were academic clubs.
So this group of women here, would those have been all students or students, faculties, spouses? Who were they?
Correct. Almost all of them would have been current students, and there might have been a handful that would have been, the advisors, like Blanche Still, Dr. Still's daughter, always was kind of an advisor for the Axis Club. And probably if we looked, we could probably find Blanche somewhere in this picture. But the majority of them were just the women. And then they would, work in conjunction with the Atlas Club. The funny thing is the Atlas Club still exists in a lot of osteopathic schools. Sadly, we don't have the Atlas Club anymore. It would have existed when you were here, I'm guessing, Dr. Brown, but it just, again, students just aren't as focused into living together and doing these things. So Theta Psi, as I told you, was always the party fraternity. And as you can see, here they are on a rake with a cigar. And I put this picture in because I thought you'd enjoy seeing the building. And you can see that wing here on the front, and then there's a wing on the back with the original brick building as a sandwich in the middle.
That's pretty cool.
Do you have any? You seem like a good guy. Any fraternity stories?
No, that's I was married with children when by the time I was in medical school. So
some of the best parties were at the Atlas House. Unfortunately, some local kids, delinquents, got in and burned it down. But that was actually the mansion of A.T. Still's son, Charles, and he donated it to the school after his death, and it was used for many years for functions.
As these students were getting ready to, well, let's keep talking about this subject, and I'll ask that question.
Well,
So,
the football games. I mean, this is interesting because, again, though we do a little bit of intramural sports, the powder puff, which is basically when the girls, first year women students, play the second year women students. So the medical and the dental women play of the first year, play the second year, and the men cheer them on from their classes. And so, unfortunately, this will be one of the first years we're not going to have the powder puff game because we were discussing with Founders Days having to do we'll do some physical things, but that's a little too close. But football was a huge deal. And that's what I'm saying. When do you have time to study? The students were supposedly the football players.
as they're getting closer and closer to graduation, you know, what was it like graduating? I mean, we didn't have residencies or internships. Was it just one of those, you finished 2 years and then you went out to practice on your own, or did they tag along with other, you know, right now we have such a mentoring program, and I know medicine started out that way, but what was the, you know, I've done my 2 years, then what would you do as a student? You know, what was the typical path?
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. You could put out your shingle and start right away. No residency, no practicing with the other doctors. You literally just went out there, and if you were good, you got business, and if you didn't, you suffered.
Did they
But
have
the
concerns
football
with
isn't.
students? Did they have concerns with students staying in the area too much? I mean, because you know you get a huge population of doctors just there in Kirksville, or
Well, and you bring up a good point. Whenever they gave a scholarship, you signed off saying that you would not practice anywhere near Kirksville. And, you know, there are a couple doctors that take on residents, and they have them sign a contract saying you will not work within 90 miles of my business. I'll take you as a resident, but you're agreeing that you're not going to be my competitor after I train you, which I can understand that to some degree. Um, Football, because we wanted to win, there is some rumor that not all the football players were students. They would actually hire guys to be football players, what we would call a ringer, and they would get paid to play football, but they weren't a student. Remember, we played MU, we played Notre Dame. Now we got our our butts handed to us, but we actually played Notre Dame, and our coach was so good that he was this Australian called the Kangaroo Kicker. Look it up sometime. They stole our coach. So we did something good, but it was starting in the 20s, after the Depression come to that football, all the sports. We had a hockey team, basketball, baseball. That it was in the 20s that was the end of sports, except for just playing around in intramurals. Dr. Still thought it was great to be healthy, but we didn't need to play sports the way we were playing them. And that brings us to today. um,
how are you surviving COVID up there? I think a lot of people maybe on this call would be interested to, you know, how is that affecting our students today?
it's really tough on the students, and we're looking at ways to keep them involved. I mean, a lot of work is being what can be done online. They're here, but they do online what they can do online. They still have the counseling services and all the things that students need, in medical school. And they, cadavers, OMM, certain things you have to physically do. And so they're done in small numbers. They stay in their same group so that groups aren't interchanging. We've got 175 freshman students here, and then that just as many second year students. So we're keeping them contained to their group so that anything that happens doesn't the whole campus started, teach them responsibility as doctors, but it's really tough. And so we're setting up things to try to get them out. It's like museum is giving them, exterior tours in small groups so that they're seeing at least a few other people and doing some things. And we're looking at Founders Day. It'll be different. Again, how can we involve students but still keep them socially distant and protected? So, they're facing a tough road. When they come on campus, they have to check into security, sign in, have their temperature taken. Washington, they follow very strict guidelines on campus, things that, we took for granted a year ago. And, signs everywhere about masks everywhere, hand sanitizer. Everywhere you go, someone's wiping up behind you. And so it is a different, as you go into the labs, it's constantly warning you, keep your 6 feet, do all these things. This is OMM. They took out, um, 3/4 of the tables. This is 25% of the OMM tables, but they're also used for ultrasounds and things and other ways of teaching, in this case, intubating. So you can see here's a faculty member and here's the setup. But normally there would be 3 times as many tables and people in these areas. And so it's a little challenging. Oh.
I bet he still would love all that space, though. Looking at that auditorium versus the one you showed earlier.
Well, and of course, the thing about it is you could get all these people in this space because the whole wall is a theater. So each section would have their own PowerPoint video. The teacher sits in the front, and then through the tables are walking the fellows, the residents, and the faculty. So you get a lot of, even with this space full, a lot of good care. And so we figured out how to do big groups, but now now they do it 3 times. So the faculty is working a lot harder to do the same job.
Well, we're so grateful for all that you guys are doing and keeping the profession going during this time. And I hope those students realize that, they're going to be part of the history book of, do you remember when school was going on during, the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, and as we know, like the Spanish flu, where we didn't have a vaccine and we really didn't, we did some of the same social distancing and masks, but after 2.5 years, it basically wore itself out. Now, it killed 500,000 people in the United States, and it wore itself out. And worldwide, it killed, we think, about 50 million. So we got off kind of easy. But we do know that at some point, it should end. But we're not thinking it's going to happen in the next 5 months.
Well, let's move on to our next subject, because I think a lot of people on this call will be very interested in it. I learned a lot in studying for this here.
Yeah. And so, we're looking at an inclusive United States world, diversity, gender equity, treating people nicely and fairly. And the good thing that we had a founder that money didn't do anything for him. Matter of fact, he just gave it away. They had to put him on an allowance because he didn't care. Money had no value to him except to give it to someone. And prestige, celebrities, being a big star, who cares? You can only be with one person at a time. And so from the perspective of how big a star can you be? And though Dr. Steele got to meet the presidents and the inventors like, Edison and anybody who was the popular people of the time, the musicians and the athletes, they all came to Mark Twain used Dr. Steele and his family and osteopathy for his things. So what I'm saying is fame meant very little to Dr. Steele. And as a result, it kept him focused, as we say, truth. That was his compass. And is it fair? And does it treat people equally? And is it the truth? Are we treating women that they can't do things? Is it the truth? Or can women do things? Can people of color do the same things given the opportunities of any other person? And so Dr. Steele, he accepted the Asian, the Middle Easterner. We have people from what was then called Persia, which would be Iran and Iraq, and people from Syria. And what I'm saying is Dr. Steele taught all people. I had also had a picture of Florence McGeorge. She was from Tasmania, Australia. And what I'm saying is women had a chance. All people, the people from England, we wanted osteopathy, or I should say Dr. Steele, meant for it to be an international healthcare profession. And it is. Our doctors can practice almost anywhere on an equal basis with doctors of other countries because of the quality that we have. And we look at the Black Lives Matter, and basically what we call microaggressions, where you might not know, as someone not living as a person of a different color or a different social class, of the challenges. We had a couple of our students give a talk not long ago who are significant officers in the military, and they're Black, and they said, Kirksville gave me a pretty good opportunity, but it hasn't been that way in my life. And I think because we stand on the shoulders of Dr. Still, and this is who he was. He was an advocate for the Black community, which there was in Kirksville at the time. These were typically former members of slave families and such, either the children of slaves or slaves themselves, and they didn't have opportunities, not the education systems and things. And Dr. Still, I mean, we had separate but equal. Blacks could do their thing, whites would do their things and live in freedom and harmony. But the Blacks wouldn't have doctors. And so Dr. Still was one of the first ones that fight for the freedom. I mean, when he was in Kansas, before there was, no slavery, he was fighting. He says, people are people, his compass of truth. Color of your skin means nothing. We should not enslave people. It's wrong. And so, he went into politics, and Dr. Still hated politics, but he always seemed to be involved with it. He went into the politics just to make sure Kansas was a state that didn't have slaves. And after a lot of work, it happened that way. Kansas did not. It was a free state. And they fought hard for that. And then, of course, we immediately went into the Civil War, and they fought all over again. But we hear about Dr. Still from some students, before the school was even founded. This is in 1882, 10 years before he even started teaching other people. He was working in Kirksville trying to get, kind of his practice going and stuff. But he would also always have time for the poor, for the Black person, the community member that might not have medical aspect. And what was so interesting was this student wrote that it was so rare to see a white man with a Black person physically helping them as a doctor that I had to come look. And I saw this man very carefully helping this elderly Black man and advising him that he'd soon have full use of his hands, with a few more treatments. And the student said, this has just struck me so odd that you didn't see this in America. And he says, and I later then came and became a student of that school. So we see the kind of person Dr. Still was.
That's really cool, that mental picture of him treating this elderly gentleman just in the middle of the street, regardless of his race or color, but, just to, be walking the streets of Kirksville and see someone performing OMT on the streets.
And that's what Dr. Still did. And often the Blacks and the poor of the community, I mean, they were suffering. And so he was their only hope, and they would come to him. But keep in mind, there were wealthy people coming in on trains, and senators from Washington, D.C. I mean, presidents and Mark, think of the people that were coming to Kirksville to get better. And Dr. Still's attitude was, we'll take you in order, who's first. And, there'd be some, poor person who maybe is house cleaning just to get by, kind of like our hotel personnel today. They don't have a lot of extra money for medical or things like that. And they're just getting by, some of them. And Dr. Still he's like, okay, I'll see. And of course, they're like, well, sir, there's these wealthy people. Dr. Still is, come on, you're next. Pain is pain. Your pain doesn't hurt any different than his pain. He can wait and he'll get his turn, and it's your turn now. And then it'd be like, but I don't have any money. We'll go ahead and treat you anyway. And if anything, Dr. Still would slip him a couple bucks in order to take a train home. Now, the wealthy, let them pay. They got it. That was Dr. Still's attitude. They don't mind paying, and they can, but don't take money from people who can't pay. And, again, we have a founder that was an amazing person. And we have a lot of students today. I see them at graduation going to do community service underserved areas, work with the American Indians, work in the worst places of cities that right now are in, having unrest. Oops, sorry about that. This phone never works. And so we're seeing that our students today are still doing a lot of the kind, well, you're going to talk to Logan Banks. What an amazing guy working in Africa. I'm sure he's not making top dollar there. Michael, what do you think?
I think I'd agree with you, but and I talked to him before he left on his medical mission, and he would tell you the same thing. Like AT Still, money was not his motivation. They felt this as an inward calling, and what I love about these discussions about AT Still is you see that same thing. It's an inward calling for him.
And I think that's the thing is Dr. Still says if you're going into osteopathy for money, it's the wrong reason. You can make money a lot easier. And with student debt, trust me, you can do a lot of things and make more money or more work as well. But if you have a passion for it, it's going to be the best journey of your life. You're going to get to do and have impacts that no other opportunity would give you. And this is going to be your life's journey. And, again, it's a good journey. And so we do see that Dr. Still in 1895, remember when he opens up that new school, well, the community was joyous. I mean, students, money, restaurants, hotels, my mercantile, my hat shop, my cigar shop. We're going to make money off these students. So, of course, the town was happy that Dr. Still was growing. But a week later, he invites the Black community into the school. And he tells them, you build it, you need to use it. And I want you to use it. I want you to get good health care. Again, what an amazing founder we had. Here's another story. And here's even great. You know what? Here's Dr. Still. He's in this buggy. They've just announced that osteopathy is legalized in all of you're now a physician. You're a legitimate doctor. And this happened in March of 1897. So paraded Dr. Still around in a cart and all that. But here is this Black woman feeling quite comfortable standing with Dr. Still to have her picture taken. And again, it just shows you this love and support of who he was. I mean, if he didn't mean anything, why would you get in a picture with this guy? And again, and Dr. Still isn't offended by this. It's like, great, it's a party for everybody.
I was reading the story there. I'd read it earlier, and it's just quite an amazing story. It just kind of shows his unique character and just willing to, serve these people. It's quite amazing.
Well, and this story is great because it does tell you that there was Foraker. He was actually the Speaker of the House. So, you got the president and then you got the Speaker of the House. That is about the most important person that, next to the president. And that person had to sit and wait while this woman got her misery in her head treated. But that's what Dr. Still said. But Foraker came back and said, I trust a man who treats people equally because I will get what I need and he won't lie to me. And that's, I think, what I'm saying. I want honesty in my health care. And a man that will do this is going to treat me well when it's my turn. And then there's a story at the bottom. We talked about these boarding houses. And there was this, one of the stories was this cook in one of these boarding houses, these furnished houses. She had a limp in her leg. And the girls were all concerned because, she takes care of us and she's injured and we don't want her to suffer. So they called Dr. Still over. And of course, she was like, no, I don't want you doing any of that on me. And it's like, get her down. He's like, we're going to fix her. And basically worked on her ankle and leg and fixed it. And the girl said the whole year and at the end of the year, she was still walking just as good as before. And so again, Dr. Still was like, again, we're going to treat you good. But we're gonna work on you. We're gonna help you here. I don't know if you had a chance to see this institute that was in Chicago. Again, we got a lot of issues in Chicago right now going on. I mean, protesting, things going on. If you've ever been down the what they call the Magnificent Mile, all the shops that I can't afford, they're protesting. They're upset. This isn't for us. The Black community, we don't shop here. We don't get hired here. And we're angry. We're sad. And yet we see that the osteopaths went to Chicago and set up a clinic for those people, 100 years ago. And they had, the women and children could come in the mornings, and the men after work could come in the evenings, and they made it work for the people. And I'm just saying, this has always been osteopathy. I don't know how many stories of osteopaths that graduated and then went and worked in some of the toughest areas. And that's how they spent their life, kind of role modeling what they'd seen in Dr. Still. That was their inspiration.
Really cool. It's fun to see these early examples. Okay. And now we're back to today.
Well, not quite. I was going to say, what people might not know is there actually was an osteopathic school for colored, that was the term in those days, for the Black community in Washington, D.C. And it graduated several classes. Unfortunately, it started in 1924, and we know the Depression came in 29. It's like COVID right now. Many businesses will never open again. Things are going to change economically, and that's what happened in America the last time we had this kind of a recession and kind of a depression. And so this school sadly went under. But it just goes to show you how supported and accepting the Black community felt that they could open up their own osteopathic school. And we wanted them to have good standards, but we didn't deny them the opportunity to create a school. Because again, Blacks could not get white doctors. And they didn't have Black doctors because Flexner closed 5 of the 7 Black medical schools. So you could imagine that, by 1924, they were desperate for doctors, and they had an opportunity through osteopathy, the Black community, to do this. And Dr. Still was upset that he never got to graduate a Black student in Kirksville, but the educational system was so restrictive for the Black population, he couldn't fight everything, that they couldn't succeed in the school. And he kept hoping. But the first actual Black osteopaths were women in Philadelphia at the PCOM school. And in 1921, 22, we have our first graduates, which I think is kind of exciting. And then if we come forward, many of you may know of Dr. William Anderson, still going, still strong, Des Moines School graduate, dean at KCOM, but after he graduated, he couldn't work. Imagine, being a Black physician and not being able to be hired. So he went to where he was needed, down in Albany, Georgia, where Martin Luther King was basically trying to get rights for the Blacks. I think it's ironic that when Dr. Anderson, who's a little bit older than me, I think he's 90, I'm 62, I was a child, and he was there as a young doctor in the same city. My dad was a pilot, so he was at the Air Force Base in Albany, Georgia. And I remember my first memory as a child was going to our bank, and I was thirsty. So I head off to the water fountain, and right away a white old man grabs me by the said, "Hold on, little boy, don't be drinking out of that water fountain." And it said Black. He goes, "The white water fountain was at the other end of the bank. You need to go down there and drink." Well, as a kid, it's like, I don't want to walk down there. There's water here. Why can't I drink here? And that's why I remember that so firmly, was the black and white water fountains in the banks. And that was just common. And so, being in Albany, Georgia, I can appreciate what Dr. Anderson was up against, and yet brave enough to go there as a physician and work to make things better. And we osteopaths do that. We work to make things better for everyone. And so it is kind of exciting. It brings us, kind of to where we are today. As Dr. Still said, he died in 1917, but he was proud of what he created, but he hadn't gone far enough. He had not graduated a black student in his school. He was a little bit disappointed about that. So, and now we are here today.
And I would just say on Dr. Anderson, what a great hero of our profession. I'm glad that I've had the opportunity to talk to him and listen to him talk before. And my goodness, just a great hero of our profession.
And his daughter's a DO, and she's been to Kirksville a few times for the history. And his granddaughter is a DO who's come to Kirksville also. And so it's great. The whole family is really amazing. And it was just last year, I think, that they raised $1 million towards, scholarships for underrepresented, underserved physicians, which is an amazing thing. And it was done because of him. The doctors that gave the money said, it's because of you. We want to give this funding. And so again, we have many great doctors, women and men, and who have done amazing things. Our NASA program, is under the care of some of our graduates, and some of the greatest health care that's going on right now, is through our students. So we've got to feel good. Nobody's going to topple Dr. Still's statue, I don't think, because he was fair. And his religion, he says, love everyone, justice for everyone. And if we just follow that thing, and that was his motto, and we've stood by Dr. Still's religion. So I don't know what else we need to chat about there, Dr. Brown.
Well, can you do me a favor here and scroll all the way back to the very beginning? Jeff has a little housekeeping stuff going on. While Jason's doing that, please, if you've got some questions for him, please type them into the chat box right now, because we'll be able to do that. And then if you'll scroll through, we just need to show the disclosure and the objectives here.
One more time.
One more time.
Amazing,
so we have them on the recordings on the beginning, the end there.
And of course, we have me. You're always welcome to come and write me, call me. We can talk history. Here's our disclosures.
Which is that we have none.
We don't get, well, you get what you pay for. Basically, we don't get paid, so you get us. And then our objectives, of course.
And hopefully we've been able to help you meet some of these objectives. But please, if you've got questions about what it was like to be a student, or A.T. Still's work as an abolitionist, we could say, very interesting stuff about him that we've learned this evening.
Yeah, and again, it's always great to be with you, Dr. Brown. You have fun questions, and and help set this up. It was his idea to do then and now, and to look at this issue of inclusiveness and diversity, and we were founded on it. And when we got our recent accreditation from the HLC recently, one of the things they said is, you have a mission. And it's scholarly, it's working with the community, it's research, it's all these things that Dr. Still put into place, and they're in our initial charter, and you're still doing them today. That's important to accreditation, is, do you know your mission, and are you following it? The underserved, and working in the capacities that we do. Interprofessional, working dentists and physicians together in all healthcare professions. That's why we have so many different areas of osteopathy. And so what I'm saying is, we have not strayed from what Dr. Still set us on the path, but he said, each person will make it better. I'm just getting the ball rolling, and you're going to make this, we're progressive. And that is why the history is important, to see where we were, and in some ways, see where we've come. And some things are the same, and some things like housing and sports and fraternities and sororities are different.
Great. Well, thanks again, Jason. Doesn't look like we have any additional questions, but feel free to reach out to myself or to him, and we'll get you to the right people and get those answered. Thank you, everybody, for this evening. And Jason, again, thank you. It's been a wonderful evening. Your knowledge is just wonderful. I sure hope you're coming along on that book, the tell-all book of everything that Jason Haxton's learned about the A.T. Still.
The definitive book of Dr. Still. I don't think there is. See, Dr. Still,
guide.
He's a tough guy to understand, and I do the best I can, but Dr. Still was a little bit crafty too. He wanted you to own it. He always leaves this space for you to learn and own these ideas and make them part of your life. And that's what was so amazing about him, is he didn't spoon feed us, which makes it kind of hard, but hard is good. It's our journey, and it should be a little hard, so we appreciate it.
Well, I think that's a perfect note to end on. Thank you again, Jason. Thank you, everybody, for your participation this evening. Everybody have a wonderful night.
Good night.